Good morning, beautiful people of planet Earth and all other interdimensional entities across this immense expanse of space and time and dimensionality. Of course, it goes without saying that we only welcome benevolent beings of love, light and truth to this channel and to this home and garden on this sacred land, Australia, Aboriginal land, and we try and keep everything in reasonable equilibrium, but occasionally nasty things slip through. AKA Exhibit A really hurts today, really hurts, but I think it's just knitting together. I would go to the hospital, but apart from the pain, I don't seem to have any real infection. I think it's just some kind of bruising. But anyway, Mama T fighting her way to her own healing without accessing hospitals. Well, I got pressured in a way to go into the hospital about that tiny little cyst that was a non-event. And this is probably a worse injury, so I'm in denial. But no, anyway, I've had to take painkillers just before, a few minutes ago, because it's quite painful. So I may have to trot myself off to, one of the local hospitals and just get them to check it out. But it's almost feels ridiculous, actually, the things I do to myself, falling off chairs and then go dancing wildly a day after injuring myself. It's like, can we say berserker Viking warrior goddess and intrepid? But I wanted to finish that pendant for, my friend in the band and Ramjet, Luke Williams, Mr. Liquor, and I wanted to give it to him on Friday night. And you know what? I didn't need to put myself through all that intense pressure. It could have waited 2 more weeks. Everything could have waited 2 more weeks. But I'm just, I don't know what it is about me lately. I'm just very determined to, fulfill my little tasks and my little missions and put pressure on my own self. No one else has put pressure on me. So what's that about, actually? Some feeling of inadequacy underlying it all, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of not honouring my contracts with the gods, because after all, at the end of the day, if it weren't for them, I wouldn't even be alive. So there is that kind of cosmic pressure to make sure that I hear and obey to the holy ones and all manifestations of holiness, and fulfill my little mission. And what will they have in store for me next when I complete this little mission, making little things for everyone? Who knows? I must say, I'm feeling a bit tired and wrung out. I didn't breathe much in my sleep last night. 3.1 times I stopped breathing, which is still not bad. It was worse before I needed the new mask replacement. It was up to like 8 times an hour. So it's still pretty good. It's still pretty good, people of Earth. And I'm surviving and I'm hanging in there. But just some days I struggle more than others. True of every human being on planet Earth, though, isn't it? Some days are just a little bit more of a struggle than others. But it's a gorgeous day outside. It's very windy. I brought my washing in and everything's dry. It's the only job I did today, though, because, not feeling so great. But I thought I'll continue sitting in the air conditioning and just, relax, and had a shower and washed my hair because weakness makes my hair oily, and I thought I would just continue with my reading to my YouTube audience and my subscribers and friends and remnant family and those who stumble across my channel, from the chapter on appearances and disappearances from Mysteries of the Unexplained. I'm not sure why it's hurting more today than it hurt even in the initial Thursday afternoon, about 4 o'clock when I did it. Probably because I was in shock, and the shock sort of blocked some of the pain, I guess. Anywho, I mustn't worry about these things. I'm a survivor. I've survived far worse things than falling off and hitting my arm on an opened vice. So let me carry on and soldier on, people of Earth. Just dreading if I have to have more, antibiotics, because that last course knocked me around somewhat, made me very depressed, which is unusual. It's not supposed to make you depressed. So I'm pulling myself up from the abject horror of it all. From 1880 to 1900. In August 1880, a young man who had given his name as Henry Edward disappeared overnight from the Florida coastal steamer City of Dallas. Although the night was quiet and the water calm, none of the watch or the ship's officers heard a splash or saw Edward go overboard. The story of the green children found in Spain is remarkably similar to that of two green children, a boy and a girl, who emerged from a cave in Woolpit, England, in the 11th century. The girl said they came from a sunless land, which there's a theory that we have a civilization that lives inside our Earth, in the Earth theory. Let's go get you a bit closer. Or they perhaps came from another parallel dimension, somehow slipped through. I don't know, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Got a bit of pain travelling up my neck. Now I'm sure that's psychosomatic because it wasn't there before I sat down to make this video. So I'm not going to freak out just yet. Just say. Two children appeared from a cave near Baños, Spain in August 1887. Their skin was green and their clothes were of an unfamiliar material. Just push this a little bit back. Yes. They could not speak Spanish, and their eyes appeared oriental, which means they were, almond-shaped or slightly slanted. At first they would not eat, and the boy died, but the girl survived and learned enough Spanish to explain that they came from a sunless land, where one day a whirlwind had swept her and her companion away and deposited them in the cave. Understandably, this did little to dispel the wonder surrounding her. She died in 1892, her origins still unknown. I wish they'd mentioned how old roughly she was when she died. Just out of curiosity, if she died still a child or if she made it to adulthood. It's clearly her brother or little boy friend didn't survive at all. It's amazing, isn't it? People's destinies and who gets to live long and rich and peaceful and comfortable lives, and who get to live turbulent, traumatic, difficult, fraught lives, and who don't make it past childhood and who do, and makes no sense, people of Earth. There's no sense to any of it, really. Only God and all manifestations of holiness probably understands it. Maybe one day when I enter the light and I'll get to ask that energy, if I ever get there. I might be going downstairs. You never know. A distraught young English woman came to the British Embassy in Paris one day in May 1889. She and her mother, on their way home from India, had checked into a hotel not long before, taking 2 single rooms, and the mother had fallen ill. The hotel doctor had examined her and sent the daughter out for medicine. When she returned, the hotel staff denied ever having seen her mother. How can that be? It's astonishing. Only the younger woman's name was in the hotel register. When she insisted on seeing the room her mother had occupied, she found it was not the one she remembered. Even the hotel doctor denied having met her before. Unable to make her story believed, the young woman ended up in an asylum in England. Oh, that's just dreadful. Some have speculated that the mother had contracted plague in the Far East and that the hotel staff had conspired to suppress the news, even going so far as to redecorate the mother's hotel room and to dispose of her corpse, rather than lose business. But the only evidence to support the case of the vanished matron was the young woman's own testimony. A sign of madness, possibly, but if true, surely enough to drive her mad. Bless. People will do those kind of unscrupulous things to save their businesses, and in those days people had very little value. I guess it's pretty much the same these days. See also COVID epoch. Yes, I am going on about that. I will go on about that until the day I die, because it was the purest of evil. The man who should have been known as the father of motion pictures, Louis Le Prince, disappeared from a French train in September 1890. He had demonstrated his process for making movies, which used a technique later credited to Thomas Edison at the Paris Opera House earlier in the year. His patent was in order, and he had a brilliant future when he stepped onto the train. But he never stepped off as far as anyone could determine. 7 years later, he was officially declared dead. Grace Marion Perkins vanished from her New England home in 1898. After a fruitless search, her parents identified a murder victim in Bridgeport, Connecticut, as their daughter. On September 17, 1898, the eve of the funeral, however, Grace Perkins showed up to explain that she had merely eloped and that now the publicity would spoil her honeymoon. Charming. From 1900 to 1920, as the supply ship Hesperus approached the island of Eilean Mor off Scotland's west coast, there was no sign of life ashore. One passenger, lighthouse keeper Joseph Moore from a nearby island, who was also relief lighthouse keeper on Eilean Mor, was especially concerned. The lighthouse had been dark for 11 days since December 15, 1900. Moore and others searched the lighthouse, finding everything in order, although oilskin, foul weather gear belonging to 2 of the 3 keepers was missing. Storm damage to a jetty suggested the possibility that the 3 men had been swept away by a giant wave. Yet would they have been so incautious as to go onto the jetty at the height of a storm? There were no answers, for none of the 3 was ever found. Here's a photo of the lighthouse. Found in perfect order in 1900, yielded no clues as to the fate of its 3 missing keepers. Very kind of Spartan, small room they were living in and working in. Be back shortly. Keep supper for me, said Charles E. Austin of Yonkers, New York, to his wife the evening of March 28, 1905, as he left his house. That was the last that she or anyone saw of him. July 4, 1906 was the wedding day of New Jersey engineer William McKeekan. An hour after the ceremony, he told his bride that he was going to get a carriage. Instead, it seems, he had second thoughts about the wedding, for he never returned. The instantly widowed Mrs. McKeekan searched for more than 17 years before seeking an annulment. Oh, darling, she must have really loved him. How dreadful. But where did he go? Where did he disappear to? Dorothy Arnold set out from her family's Manhattan home on the morning of December 12, 1910, to shop for a dress to wear to her younger sister's coming out party. She was a Bryn Mawr graduate, daughter of a prosperous importer and a socially prominent mother. Acquaintances who saw her walking west to Fifth Avenue, then south toward a bookstore at 27th Street, said later that she seemed cheerful. The salesgirl who sold her a box of chocolates noticed nothing amiss, nor did the friend who encountered her outside the bookstore. Yet Dorothy Arnold was never seen again, despite an international search for the vanishing heiress. Here's a photo of her. She's very beautiful. Very pretty woman indeed. I searched for her worldwide. Never found her. Where is it? Bloody heavy in this book on my sore arm. Look at her. Well, that's all we have left of her as a photo. At first, the Arnold family kept her disappearance a secret, conducting private inquiries through a friend of the family and the Pinkerton Detective Service. But after 6 weeks, they turned to the police, and Mr. Arnold summoned reporters to his office to announce his conviction that she had been attacked in Central Park on her way home and her body cast into the reservoir. Horrible as that thought was, the rigid and respectable Mr. Arnold apparently preferred it to another possibility, that his daughter had run away with George Griscom Jr., with whom she had spent a clandestine week several months before. Griscom denied any knowledge of Dorothy's whereabouts. He returned to her family a letter she had written him, in which she had lamented a magazine's rejection of a story she had submitted, concluding, "All I can see ahead is a long road with no turning." Had she concealed a deep depression at the blow to her hopes for a career as a writer, one that was deep enough to make her take her own life? Still another suggestion was that she had slipped and fallen on the icy pavement and suffered amnesia from a concussion and had been hospitalised. But no Manhattan hospital had admitted anyone resembling her. The more investigators looked into Dorothy Arnold's life, the more they found behind the facade of the refined, well-brought-up young lady. But they found no reason to suspect suicide or foul play. And they never found Dorothy Arnold. I'm going to Mexico with a pretty definite purpose which is not at present disclosable, Ambrose Bierce wrote to his literary secretary on December 16, 1913. At 71, the mordant ironist of In the Midst of Life and the Devil's Dictionary was still energetic and curious enough to want to see for himself the rebellion of Pancho Villa, although he knew the risk he was taking. If you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags, please know that I think that's a pretty good way to depart this life. It beats old age, disease, or falling down cellar stairs, or cracking your arm on a vice, just saying, by the gods. To be a gringo in Mexico, that is euthanasia. Oh, excuse me. His secretary and acquaintances never heard from Bierce again, and his case became a classic in the annals of mysterious disappearances. Someone that was hoping to get shot to pieces against a Mexican stone wall sounds a little bit suicidal to me. Just saying, reading a little bit between the lines. Later developments may have provided an answer. In 1923, his friend Adolphe de Castro went to Mexico to question Vila, who said he had ordered Bierce to leave the rebel camp after the writer had uttered some indiscreet words in favour of Villa's enemy, Carranza. And what happened to him then? Who knows? Shrugged the old bandit. Later, though, Villa's brother, Hipólito, and his comrade, General Reyes, took de Castro aside and confided that 2 gunmen had been sent after the aged American iconoclast. A psychiatrist referred to me as an iconoclast. My fierce opposition to the COVID epoch in 2020. Well, someone's got to do it, not be a feckin' coward. Honestly. Anyway, what can I say? Here I am, staving off going to hospitals because I don't enjoy them and I don't trust them, and maybe it's going to bring about, hasten my death one fine day. I mean, they weren't terrible to me at Redlands Hospital only 2 weeks ago with the cyst. They were actually, quite okay. But the young doctor sort of looked at me with this mixture of kind of awe and terror, and I'm like, I'm just sitting here waiting for you to squeeze an infection out of my back for the love of all the gods. It's just so weird and confronting how I wasn't abused. I can't say I was abused. She did her job very professionally, but with sort of a mixture of awe and kind of terror. Kept going on about having to put, the plastic sheeting, that catches all blood and pus and goop, down the back of my skirt in case it imploded everywhere, which it did not, thankfully, because that would have been gross. She went on about that, and it sort of made me feel like I was some kind of dirty, fetid specimen, which I guess when you have cysts in your back, you kind of are, because those things can. Anyway, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like that at all. She had a lot of difficulty cleaning the wound, actually. Anyway, this thing is going to, I'll have to take action, I guess. Right. That may have been simply a tale concocted to give de Castro what he obviously expected to hear, but it is the nearest thing to an explanation for Bierce's disappearance. Few deaths would have better merited the trite old funeral goer's phrase. He would have wanted it that way. This caricature of the iconoclastic writer Ambrose Bierce, affectionately known as San Francisco's favourite curmudgeon, was executed by Swinnerton in 1911, meaning the caricature was drawn by Swinnerton. They're really playing on that execution word. 2 years later, Bierce disappeared in Mexico during the revolutionary upheaval there. I like how they've kind of drawn him with really fucking crazy eyes. In fact, I kind of recognise those crazy eyes. My grandmother had eyes like that, and my father when he was in a mad, boiling rage. It's also the eyes of some kind of genius too. Could go either way. Just say. I'm joking. Well, maybe I'm not joking. Well, I'm not well. I'm not well. You just have to work with me when I'm not well. I extrapolate and hyperbolate and concentrate and conflagrate and go into denial about possibly getting tetanus or sepsis or some other ugly thing. I'm just going to stay in denial about that. It's how my father died. Anyway, I did have septic arthritis in 2012 too. 3 days I marched around on a very sore foot wondering what was wrong with me. Honestly. So, carry on, people. Carry on. It's a fine line between genius and insanity, and some of us don't inhabit our bodies terribly well, live from the neck up and refuse to deal with any inconveniences. James Regan, a passenger aboard the liner Prince Heinrich, bound from Marseille to Naples on January 28, 1914, unaccountably disappeared with his luggage in mid-voyage. A suicide with suitcases? They question. How could he disappear with his luggage mid-voyage? Because most luggage is kept in the hold. It's a bit odd, isn't it? Well, anyway, maybe they didn't keep luggage in the hold in 1914. Piled it up in their little cabins. I don't know. But anyway, he disappeared, and that's all we need to know about that. According to many writers on UFOs and on the occult, hundreds of British troops were mysteriously abducted by a cloud that settled over them as they advanced toward the Turkish positions during one of the battles of the Gallipoli campaign in 1915. Had an uncle perish there. Well, a great uncle. Was my grandmother's brother. The source for this story is a statement written 50 years after the incident by 3 New Zealand soldiers who deposed that they had watched a dense, solid-looking cloud shaped like a loaf of bread settle on the ground in the path of an advancing column of troops. After the men walked into it, the account went on, the cloud lifted, leaving no one behind. I haven't heard that story before. That's new to me. Most of the 34,000 Allied troops who died at Gallipoli in the First World War have no known grave. Some said that the soldiers walked into a cloud and disappeared. It was a dreadful war. All wars, oh, that really hurts. Oh my God. All wars are fucking dreadful, including the war we're having right now that most people don't even realise we're at a war. But it's a spiritual war for our health and for our souls. Just try to remember that, people of Earth. Cleave to the gods of your understanding, however you express that, whether Christian, Jew, Muslim, spiritualist, however you express your faith in some bigger entity that has us all, creator of us all. Sometimes at the end of the day, that's all you've got. Unless a cloud comes and takes you to a planet far, far away, you just look around. Probably wouldn't be so bad right now. Anyway, into thin air, Paul Begg concluded that this disappearance could not have happened as described. The battalion named by the New Zealanders was not unaccounted for. Another battalion had been decimated in battle, but that was 9 days before the date given in the statement. And the report of the post-war commission that investigated the disastrous Gallipoli campaign, I think it really was disastrous. We lost so many men, the Anzacs there, Australian, New Zealand, young men in the first flush of their youth. It was it's just a fucking killing field. Included mention of an unseasonable mist that blinded Allied artillery gunners, but aided their Turkish counterparts in wiping out a British unit. Significantly, that report was only fully declassified in 1965, and its publication may have brought forth a confused recollection by the New Zealanders. I doubt it. We're not that stupid people. We're actually well-educated people, for people who live right at the very end of the earth, next door to Antarctica. It's not wise to underestimate us as a people. We might be relatively small population, but, well, at least during my childhood and adolescence, and we were well educated. Many of us are very well travelled too, those that have enough money to travel across the globe, because we live in a parochial backwater and we want to see the world. We want the world to see us too. We want to experience everything. We're very innovative people too. Very innovative, because we had to be in the back of the back, far away from America and Europe, and during wartime, all the inventions. We were the last to receive things, so we had to sometimes invent our own things. Although the details are questionable, a mystery concerning the fallen still remains. As Begg notes, of the 34,000 British and Empire troops who died at Gallipoli, 27,000 have no known grave. In the light of such widespread carnage, how many more strange disappearances do those bald statistics hide? Indeed. The crew of the ship Zebrina disappeared in October 1917. During a short voyage across the English Channel in good weather, there were no clues aboard. Of course not, there were no clues if it disappeared completely. I mean, that's just a silly paragraph there. I mean, I might not be well, but I'm still processing people there. Processing. British missionaries in Nepal were summoned to the deathbed of a Hindu priest in 1917. In the room, they found a 14-year-old Caucasian boy. The dying priest gestured toward him and said, "I took this child from a street in Wimbledon, England, in 1910. He gave no more details before dying. The missionaries informed the authorities, who were unable to identify the boy's parents. All that the boy himself could say was that his name was Albert. He spent the rest of his life in India without ever learning anything more about his origins." It's just appalling, isn't it? Imagine that. So he took him when he was 7 years old. Don't even want to think about why he took him, people of Earth. Read between the lines. The Romanov dynasty that had ruled Russia since 1613 came to an end with the Bolshevik Revolution. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their son and 4 daughters were imprisoned at Ekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains, guarded by secret police of the new government. By most accounts, they were shot and their bodies burned on July 16, 1918, as a counter-revolutionary army fought its way toward Ekaterinburg to rescue them. But from that day on, rumours of their survival never ceased. Some said they escaped to Poland in a sealed train with Lenin's tacit permission. Over the years, there have been several claimants to the Romanov name, notably Colonel Michael Goleniewski, a Polish officer who defected to the United States in 1960. His claim that he was Nicholas's son, the Grand Duke Alexei, was supported by a former research director of the CIA. Several women have said they were Anastasia, the youngest daughter of the Tsar. The spice of royal mystery and the lure of the missing Romanov fortune, which is supposedly still held in Western banks, have flavoured many fanciful versions of the unlikely escape from the Bolsheviks at Ekaterinburg. Here's a photo of them before they allegedly perished upon execution. Either way, it was a horrific thing to happen to them as a family. I'm not particularly a royalist, but no one deserves to be cut down like the way they were. It's awful. Ambrose J. Small, a Toronto theatre owner and man about town, had just concluded the sale of his theatre chain, and his wife had deposited a cheque for $1 million. That evening, December 2, 1919, he walked through a heavy snowstorm to pick up the New York Times and swore loudly when he found that the train that usually brought the newspaper had been delayed. Those curses were the last words anyone ever heard from the irate Ambrose Small. The case was a 9-day wonder, for Small was known to have kept several mistresses and to have gambled heavily. His secretary, John Doty, gave the story another twist by absconding with $100,000 in bonds on the same day. Captured and tried a year later for this offence, Doty seemed to have had nothing to do with his employer's disappearance. As in the case of the Romanovs, the lure of money brought forth many impostors, but Small was pronounced dead in 1923. Many connoisseurs of the mysterious remember him best for Charles Font's whimsical linkage of his disappearance with that of Ambrose Bierce. What could the disappearance of one Ambrose in Texas have to do with the disappearance of another Ambrose in Canada? Was somebody collecting Ambroses? From 1920 to 1940. In February 1920, the naked body of a man in his late 30s was found in a field in Hampshire, England. Tracks showed that he had wandered for some distance before collapsing and dying of exposure. No investigation could link the body to any disappearance, nor was there any evidence that it was a case of murder, wrote the London Daily News. Although his photograph has been circulated north, east, south and west throughout the United Kingdom, the police are still without a clue, spelt C-L-E-W. And there is no record of any missing person bearing the slightest resemblance to this man, presumably from his grooming of education and good standing. Mountain climbers George Lee Mallory and Andrew C. Irvine were less than 1,000 feet below the peak of Mount Everest on June 8, 1924. Then swirling, wind-driven snow and mist hit them from the telescope in the base camp below, and they were never seen again. Everest was conquered, for the record, in 1953, but the tantalising possibility remains that two men had reached its summit almost 30 years before. Lee Mallory, 36, had participated in two earlier attempts on Everest. The leader of this third expedition described him as the living soul of the offensive. The thing had become a personal matter with him. Irvine, 22, had little mountaineering experience, but was skilled with the cumbersome, I think they mean bulky, cumbersome oxygen gear. They had made camp the night before at 26,800 feet, sending their Sherpa bearers down to tell the others that they hoped to reach the peak early the next morning. For some reason, they got a late start or were held up in the early part of the climb, for it was 12:50 p.m. on the 8th when they were observed at 28,227 feet. Then the clouds closed in, and the only evidence ever found was Lee Mallory's or Irvine's ice axe, discovered along their route in 1933. Perhaps they fell into an icy crevasse or were swept away by an avalanche that entombed them far below the challenging peak of the Everest. The answer, like the climbers themselves, was lost in clouds at the top of the world. When we hear of expeditions seeking lost cities, we think of the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors' 16th century dream of El Dorado. But another such expedition set forth into Brazil's little-known Mato Grosso on April 20, 1925. It was led by Lieutenant Colonel Percy Fawcett, an archaeologist, geographer and adventurer, whose dreams of discovery were no less vivid and alluring than those of the conquistadors. They led him, his son Jack, and their companion Rayleigh Rummel to an unknown fate in a forbidding land. Fawcett had served in Great Britain's Indian Army in Ceylon at the turn of the century, spending his free time searching for ancient tombs and treasures. Going to South America, he spent the years 1906 to 1909 surveying a long and excessively unhealthy sector of the Brazilian-Bolivian frontier. At the end of that period, he carefully studied an 18th century Portuguese account of a great city that lay in ruins, which was purportedly rich in gold and gems. Convinced that the city existed, indeed that Brazil's lost cities predated even those of Egypt, Fawcett and his party started out from Cuiabá, travelling light and planning to live off the country. His last dispatch, dated May 30, stated in part, "We have cut our way through miles of cerraba, a forest of low dry scrub. We have crossed innumerable small streams by swimming and fording. We have climbed rocky hills by forbidding aspect. We have been eaten by bugs. We shall not get into interesting country for another 2 weeks." The world heard no more from Fawcett and his companions. Because he had warned they would be gone for at least 2 years, and because his wife was convinced he was well, there was no search party until May 1928. And by then, the trail was cold. Indians from several of the mutually hostile tribes in the area accused each other of killing the explorers. Others told of seeing the Englishmen near death from disease and exhaustion. For more than a decade, travellers returned with stories that Fawcett had gone native, a half-mad old man in rotting rags among the Indians. But no convincing evidence ever emerged to resolve the mystery. An extraordinary case of amnesia, covering a span of 40 years, was reported in 1927. I'm going to have to get a drink of water, I think. Oh, I've got a bottle here. Oh, that water will be a bit stale, won't it? It's been there for 3 days. Maybe not. I'll be back, people. I need a glass of water. Right, I feel quite weak, so I shouted myself some chocolate. I won't be doing a 3-hour video today. I actually feel like hell today. Hell. I'm okay. I'm just wrung out. Probably from the bad night with my breathing as well. Like Icarus, I flew too close to the sun. Friday, Saturday, even yesterday. So today, Monday, I've fallen in a heap. But I'm like that, people. I do that. Overachieve and then collapse. It's my normal pattern of behaviour. Right. Where are we now? An extraordinary case of amnesia covering a span of 40 years was reported in 1927. Albert Mayfield, a British subject travelling aboard the steamer Siam, collapsed after bleeding from the nose and ears. Dear goddess, how awful that would be. When he regained consciousness, he knew himself as Albert Gurney of Rose, Minnesota. But his most recent memory was of a day when he was 14 years old and a schoolmate threw a rock that hit him on the head. According to the New York Times for July 16, 1927, Gurney had to be calmed when he saw his first airplane and has never heard jazz. He is assured by people who met him before his collapse on the steamer that he talked several languages, but he does not know them now, nor does he know anything about his wife and 2 grown-up boys, of whom he talked on the steamer. How dreadful for his wife and his children. It is dreadful. We're going to get a storm or rain or something's happening out there, people of Earth. Watching some parcel delivery man went down the road and then he came back and he's reversed all the way back down. It's just odd behaviour. Odd. It's not my monkey though, it's not my circus. Just observing the odd behaviours. Very odd. His neighbours in the Bronx saw Dr. Charles Brancati as an immigrant who had made good as a doctor and an investor in the spiralling stock market of the late 1920s. But after his disappearance on November 19, 1926, I'm really flubberising, aren't I? On November 19, 1928, they learned that his career had an element of something sinister, perhaps sinister enough that someone had wanted him dead. On that Sunday morning, Brancati had his handyman drive him to a nearby subway station. He said he was in a hurry to get to his Manhattan office. For the next 4 months, his brothers received letters from him, postmarked first New Jersey, then Canada, then England. When the police were called in, they found Brancati's house in disarray, littered with scraps of paper and overturned furniture. There were bullet holes in a wall and an unsigned threatening letter referring to a woman who had spurned the writer. The police were developing a kidnap theory when federal law enforcement officers informed them that Brancati had a long record of association with counterfeiters and the high-rolling gangster Arnold Rothstein, who had been murdered 2 weeks before Brancati's disappearance. Had Brancati feared the same would happen to him? Had he betrayed Rothstein? Was the threatening letter a real clue or a clumsy attempt at misdirection? The possibilities were so varied that they could hardly be narrowed down without first learning of Brancati's fate, and that remains unknown. No disappearance in American history stirred so much speculation as that of New York Supreme Court Associate Justice Joseph F. Crater on August 6, 1930. Tall, imposing and dapper, the 41-year-old Crater was a rising figure in the city's corrupt Tammany Hall Democratic organisation. He had withdrawn more than $20,000 from the bank at about the time of his appointment as interim justice. The sum was close to a year's salary, the standard Tammany payoff for a lucrative post. It was not a fruitless investment, according to investigators who later looked into his role as receiver of a bankrupt hotel. Crater sold it to a bond and mortgage firm for $75,000, and 2 months later the city agreed to buy it back for a planned street widening at a condemnation price of nearly $3 million. Quite a handsome profit there. Sally Lou Ritz, left, was among the last people to see Judge Crater right. Her own disappearance a few weeks later led to the speculation that she knew too much. In June 1930, Judge Crater and his wife went to their summer cottage in Maine. At the end of July, he got a telephone call and told his wife he had to get back to the city to straighten those fellows out. He made a trip to Atlantic City with one of the showgirls he favoured, and was back in Maine by August 1. On August 3, he returned to New York, and on August 6, he had cheques for more than $5,000 cashed, then spent the afternoon collecting papers from his office. That evening, with a ticket for a Broadway show in his pocket, he dined at a midtown chop house, sitting with lawyer friend William Klein and his companion, a stunning showgirl named Sally Lou Ritz. Then Crater hailed a taxi, stepped inside, and disappeared forever. The purported explanations for Crater's exit would fill a book. His shady political friends got rid of him before he could be summoned to testify in a graft investigation. He died in the company of his mistress or a prostitute. He was lured to Westchester and killed in a dispute over a payoff, or he decided to start a new life in Quebec, the Caribbean, or Europe. For decades after his disappearance, his name was a slang term for dodging one's responsibilities. To pull a Crater was to slip away for good. All that can be said today was said in the 1930s. Joseph F. Crater is either securely dead or else alive. He would be in his 90s back in 1982 when this book was published. He'd be well and truly dead now, by the gods. Unless he's a vampire and lives forever. That would be a horrible way to live, life, being a vampire. You know, never seeing daylight, having to suck people's blood and feed like a parasite off other beings. It's just not as glamorous as they make it out, people of Earth. He would be in his 90s and perhaps pleased at having carried off one of the most thoroughly investigated and mysterious vanishing acts on record. Indeed. Bank robber John Dillinger, according to authorities, was shot down by federal agents in Chicago on July 22nd, 1934. But according to J. Robert Nash, a crime historian, the autopsy report showed that the corpse was shorter and stockier than Dillinger, had brown rather than blue eyes, and showed signs of a rheumatic heart condition, which Dillinger did not have. Was there a cover-up for publicity purposes? Catching him greatly enhanced the prestige of J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau of Investigation, later known as the FBI. Did Dillinger, in fact, live on, secure in the knowledge that no dead man would appear in the "Wanted Alive" placards plastered on the post office wall? In 1936, just a few blocks from where Judge Crater was last seen stepping into a taxi, financier Fred Lloyd dropped a friend off after a shared cab ride, and then rode uptown. He was never seen again. His wife continued to believe until her death in 1945 that he would return. 3 uncashed insurance policies on Lloyd were found in her hotel suite. Wow. The puzzling disappearance of an aircraft in a densely populated region occurred in April 17, 1938. Andrew Carnegie Whitfield, nephew of the steel tycoon, took off from Roosevelt Field, Long Island, for another airfield 22 miles away. He had logged 200 hours of experience in the air, and his small craft had enough fuel for a 150-mile flight, but neither he nor the airplane ever showed up again. The public imagination, whetted by the 1930s rash of disappearances and kidnappings, spotted the missing 28-year-old flyer everywhere, including Council Bluffs, Iowa, where, more than a year later, railroad detectives thought they saw him riding a freight car, wearing a soiled flying suit, waving a handful of large bills at them, and smiling. Right. We'll read this blurb in the middle of this before we go over the page. The last flight of Amelia Earhart. Here's a photo of her. Very pretty woman. Admirers of Amelia Earhart, the first woman to fly the Atlantic alone, were reluctant to attribute her disappearance over the Pacific in 1937 to pilot error. They called her Lady Lindy after Charles A. Lindbergh, but to establish herself as a great flyer, she had to overcome opposition that Lindbergh and other men never faced. Amelia Earhart, who was born in 1898, was in college planning to be a doctor when she became entranced with flying. She learned quickly and in 1922 set a women's altitude record. Becoming in 1928 the first woman to go on a transatlantic flight. She found herself at the centre of a publicity blitz orchestrated by George Putnam, whom she married in 1931. The following year, she flew the Atlantic solo, and in the next few years undertook other long-distance solo ventures, all the while advocating women's rights. The pinnacle of her career was to be an eastward, round-the-world flight in a specially equipped twin-engine plane, departing from California in May 20, 1937. She and her co-pilot navigator, Fred Noonan, skimmed over Florida, Brazil, West Africa, Pakistan, India, Burma, Singapore, Australia. All went well until July 2. That morning, fuel tanks topped off, Earhart and Noonan left Lae, New Guinea, for the 2,556-mile flight to tiny Howland Island in the central Pacific. There the Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited to send homing signals while other ships patrolled the area. As the scheduled time of arrival drew near, the Itasca received fragmentary messages. Cloudy and overcast, want bearings. Nothing more was heard. The moment Putnam learned that his wife was missing, he went to one of her closest friends, Jacqueline Cochrane, also an outstanding pilot. Cochrane, in the past, had successfully located lost planes, and Earhart was convinced that she had extrasensory perception. Before taking off, she asked her friend to employ these powers on her behalf if needed. In her autobiography, The Stars at Noon, Cochrane recalled that she at once told Putnam that Amelia was alive. She specified the area in the Pacific where her plane was floating and named 2 boats nearby, one of them the Itasca, which she had not heard of at the time, and the other a Japanese fishing vessel. She begged Putnam, Cochrane wrote, to keep my name out of it, but to get planes and ships out to the designated area. Navy planes and ships in abundance combed that area, but found no trace. I followed the course of her drifting for 2 days. It was always in the area, being well combed. A massive search revealed nothing, but the nation, unwilling to accept the loss of its heroine, held on to its hopes. Stories circulated for weeks that radio messages had been picked up stating, on coral southwest of unknown island. As time went by, it was suggested she had been forced down on a volcanic isle that later sank, or on a Japanese-held island off limits to the US. Following the outbreak of World War II, it was theorised that Earhart had been on a mission of military surveillance, perhaps ordered by President Roosevelt, and that she was held as a prisoner of war. According to Fred Gerner, author of The Search for Amelia Earhart, Admiral Chester Nimitz told him that the flyers had in fact been picked up and presumably executed by the Japanese. After the war, a California resident who had lived on Saipan Island in 1937 claimed she had seen 2 flyers there, one of whom resembled Amelia. The story surpassed belief, but the speculation about the fate of Lady Lindy and Fred Noonan still continues. Richard Halliburton, the world-famous adventurer and writer, disappeared with a crew of 13 aboard his specially built Chinese junk Sea Dragon during a Pacific typhoon in late March 1939. The voyage had begun in Hong Kong on March 4 and was to have ended in San Francisco, site of the World's Fair that summer, but his last message was received on March 23. Halliburton's 7 books, and widely syndicated newspaper column had acquainted millions of readers with his daring do's in romantic and exotic settings, from the Hellespont, where he swam from Europe to Asia as Lord Byron had done, to the Yucatan, where he swam in a cenote or cenote, a sacred pool once used for sacrifices by Mayan priests. His sea dragon voyage was to have provided authentic colour for a new book on the possibility of Pacific crossings to America in ancient times, but the ocean ruled otherwise. Efforts to locate his bravely painted ship were eventually abandoned. Right, there's quite a few more pages to go, but I might just stop there because I'm actually feeling quite weak today. Enough is enough, people of Earth. The psychedelic dreamer has declared it's enough. I'll just show you a photo of Richard Halliburton. After receiving priestly invocations for a safe voyage, Richard Halliburton set sail from Hong Kong in 1939 to cross the Pacific in a junk and was apparently lost at sea. So yes, I'll put a little mark in there so we know where to begin from for video 3, continuing with the last 1, 2, 3, 4 pages or so. I feel like a failure to quit right now when there's only 4 pages left, but I need to lie down, rest. So, on that note, Goddess bless. Have a beautiful day wherever you are in the space-time continuum. And remember, as always, never ever let the bastards grind you down, and allow yourself time to heal, in my case. And stay happy. Bye for now, people of Earth.